so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Bahia Simons Lane. I'll introduce myself more later, but I'm the Executive Director of USJETAA. Thank you for being here with us tonight to talk about the Microgrant Initiative for American Jets. And we also have some special guests from the Embassy of Japan who will chime in throughout this presentation where relevant. And then at the end, we will take your questions. So before we get started, I just would like to have everybody who is on this webinar tonight just briefly introduce themselves, and we'll go ahead and start with Grace.
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Tokyo, Japan. My name is Grace Choi, and I'm an American diplomat working here at the US Embassy in Tokyo. I'm happy to be with you tonight. Thanks for having me. Just a quick overview on my portfolio. So my team and I work primarily on building people-to-people exchanges in the form of exchange programs and also as related to everything that's related to education. So that's study abroad, English language, which is how we are tied to you and the JET program and USJETAA. And then of course, other program and engagement opportunities and the like. I've been an American diplomat since 2011, and previous tours of mine include Kuwait City, the US Embassy in Kuwait City, the US Embassy in Seoul, South Korea, the US Embassy in Islamabad, Pakistan, and then a couple years learning Japanese prior to my position here in Tokyo. Thanks.
Thanks for being with us tonight, Grace. Noyori, could you take a minute to just briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Noyori. I work with Grace at the US Embassy in Tokyo. I'm a local hire, so I've been working at the embassy in Tokyo since about 11 years ago. And it has been such a great experience working with not just directly with the Japanese audience, but with you, JET teachers, because you are the face of the United States in Japan, and we really enjoy working with you. And we would really love to inform a lot of Japanese students about America, and we look forward to working with you this year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noyori. We've been working with the embassy on this grant program for, I think, about 4 years now. So we're very excited that we're able to bring it to you again. I would like to just briefly introduce myself. As I said before, I'm the Executive Director of USJETAA. I was a JET program ALT from 2005 to 2007 in Gunma. And then I worked at the Board of Education as the Assistant Language Teacher Advisor for 1 year before returning to the US. And I work full-time as the Executive Director of USJETAA, and I'm really excited to be able to bring programs like this for current JETs. This is our only program that works with current JETs. So I'm very happy that we have this opportunity to work with you. Casey, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Casey Nealy. I'm the program coordinator for USJETAA. I work with Bahia on the program, and I was a JET program participant from 2013 to 2015. I was an ALT in Kumamoto Prefecture. And for USJETAA, I do a lot of the programming, and I also specifically work on this microgrant program, doing a lot of the day-to-day interaction with our grantees and things like that. So if you do end up applying to the program, we will probably be working very closely together. So if you do have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Casey. All right, now we're going to move on, and we'll give you the rundown on this microgrant program. So in this presentation, we're going to cover what the Microgrant Initiative is, who's eligible to apply, types of projects, the selection process and grant timeline, how you apply, and then we'll take questions at the end. And I think there's a few other slides spattered in here as well. All right, so Casey, do you want to do the overview?
Sure, I'll go ahead and do that. So For the overview, the Microgrant Initiative, it provides small grants, and those are usually from $200 to $1,000 to JET participants. And those JET participants must be American citizens who are currently on the JET program. And it doesn't matter if you're an ALT or a CIR or an SEA. If you are one of those, you can apply to the program. And it funds projects that introduce American culture, English language to students in the classroom. You can also do a community project as well. So it doesn't have to be based in your classroom or your schools, but also in your local community. And the Microgrant Initiative is funded by the US Embassy Tokyo. We work very closely with them and we administer the project. So that's kind of the basic overview of the project, and we'll get into some more of the details as we go.
And if you are a SEA or no one, we'd love to have them apply for this project. We've never had an SEA apply. I've never even met an SEA, so I'm seeking them in the alumni network, and I haven't discovered any yet, but I know that they're out there somewhere. Okay, so first I want to just talk briefly about the purpose and goals for this program. So the overall goal for the program is to promote English language learning and study abroad. And we have a few priority areas that we are focusing on this year. We're focusing on offering information and resources for Japanese students who are considering to study abroad in the United States. We're talking about, programs on how to introduce world-class higher education in the United States to Japanese students. So, encouraging Japanese students to learn English as a communication tool, and show and tell of American education or its system to Japanese students. And so these are the priority areas we're focusing on, though that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that if you don't exactly fit in one of those priority areas, we'll still consider your project. But those are the areas we're focusing on. And then we're also concerned with sustainability. So will your program be able to continue after this year? Will you be able to find a way to, leave information with your JTE or your successor to make sure that this program can carry on after you have finished? And then I'd like to actually invite the embassy representatives to talk a little bit about what they hope this program, why they're supporting this program, and what they hope this program will accomplish. And Noyori or Grace, either of you can jump in.
I'm happy to kick off this conversation. Really, I think this is a great opportunity for you as JETs to expand on ideas, programs, thoughts that you have, to interact with your students in a way that might be a little bit different from the day-to-day in the classroom. We know that you have a lot of really great ideas, and sometimes all you need is just a little bit of funding to be able to do this or that. In terms of these priority areas, though, really, we think one of the greatest resources that the students have in terms of understanding America, of course, in addition to the English language, is you as individuals, your backgrounds, your histories, the experiences that you've had. And so being able to share these with your students in English, especially in the form of talking about studying in the United States, is a huge asset and a feature that really only we as students or people who've studied in the United States can offer. And so that's why we have such a great focus on these areas. Especially for studying abroad and English language education. These are also priorities for the US mission to Japan. And so that's an additional reason why we have such an emphasis on these particular areas.
If I can add a little bit to what Grace just mentioned, as much as we would like to promote studying in the United States, a lot of times studying abroad means studying at schools in high school level or university level. So if you're one of those JET teachers who teach at elementary schools, of course, you're not going to directly, well, I shouldn't say of course, but you may not be directly promoting higher education in the United States. But if you can think about how your programs could in the future could seed the idea of studying in the United States to Japanese students in your schools. That would be something that we would like to see in your proposal. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. And considering these the purpose and goals of the program is, I think, especially important in the part of the application where we ask you about the impact you see from your project. So I think that's a really important part of your application. So, keep that in mind as you're working on your application. Okay, I'm going to throw this one to you.
Okay, so in terms of what types of projects that we're looking for, here's some examples of what past grantees have done. So a lot of the projects have revolved around hosting cultural events. So that can be like in your community, and that can be based off of American culture, or we've had like a scholarship event where maybe the ALT or CIR is educating the community about available scholarships for students to study abroad, as well as having food from that culture or performances, or sharing some sort of lesson or things about that culture, and having the community, inviting the community in, as well as students to participate. Another really common project that we have is pen pal or video exchanges, and that can be either at a community level, maybe if you have an English like Eikaiwa or something like that, or within the school to pen pal with another school in America. More commonly this year, we've had a lot of video exchanges because of COVID, where you are video chatting with a school in the United States, or maybe you're doing an email exchange instead of sending the traditional letters and things like that. So we've had a lot more virtual exchanges there. There's also, we want to encourage students and the community to use English through these. So if that's writing letters or doing a video exchange where people are speaking, but you can also do that through other sort of activities, whether that's cooking. We've had a lot of cooking projects, or doing some improv. We've also had a group of students who made podcasts, so English language podcasts, to teach people abroad and in America about Japanese culture and stuff, and the students were able to write that themselves. So there's a lot of different ways that students can use English, or the community can use English. That's not necessarily an English lesson, but some other activity. Another really common project is creating a physical resource. So that can be maybe buying English books for your school or community, and because they don't have access to those types of books, or past grantees have also bought games so that the students can play together in English, or other sort of resources like that. Last year we had someone who used English comics because they had maybe lower level students or students who are in elementary school, and were able to use that to engage students further. So these are some of the past projects that we've had, and you can find all of these projects on our website. We write about all of our previous projects, so you can see what some of the past grantees have done. And then just another important note, in the last year, we've had grantees who have had more in-person projects, bigger projects like that have had complications due to COVID, and so we just want to remind everyone to check with the restrictions and things in your area, and make sure that your project is doable. A lot of projects have moved online, whether that's creating an online resources or English language videos or things like that, or engaging with students that way, or having more socially distanced or projects like that. So definitely consider that when you're thinking about projects this year, and making sure that you're able to do the projects that you want to do this year. And if you need some more suggestions about those, I've written about those on our website as well.
Yeah, as Casey mentioned, due to COVID, there had been some changes to projects over the past grant year, and we actually extended the last grant year. And so we have posted a blog post on the website about the projects that have already been completed, but not all of our projects have been completed for that grant year because we have extended it due to the COVID situation. And so you'll just the final report about all of the projects from this past grant year affected by COVID is probably not going to be available by the time that you apply. But if you have any questions about the feasibility of a specific project, we're also available to answer those. Okay. All right, so let's talk about eligibility and requirements for the project. So first, since this is funded by the US Embassy in Tokyo, you must be a United States citizen. You must also be a current JET participant on the JET program. It does not matter what position with JET you hold, ALT, CIR, or SEA, you can apply. And you're welcome to have co-applicants and collaborators who are not JETs, and they also do not need to be US citizens. So for example, in the past, some JETs have partnered with other JETs in their area for a larger program, and some of the organizer was an American JET, but some of the other JETs who were working on the project were JETs from England or Australia or wherever. We also have had a lot of JETs partner with their JTE, so they're working within the school with their Japanese teacher of English. And then in terms of community projects, we have had people also partner with community organizations related to English or international associations. Though you must be a current JET who's from the United States to apply, it's not so restrictive in that sense. You also must be able to carry out your proposed projects related to COVID, as we mentioned. Even prior to COVID being an issue, please consider and create your plan for your project and your proposal for your project with something that you think is feasible. You don't need to be overly ambitious, just to make sure that you have a clear idea and a clear process that you outline in your application. And if we like your project and we don't think it's reasonable, that's something we would also let you know. And then there are some requirements. You must submit an interim report and a final report by the specific deadlines for this grant year. That's so that we can see how things are progressing and how things are going. After the interim report, if you're having any issues or need any support, that also gives us an opportunity to provide some additional support for you. And then the final report is important as well. For those of you who might be finishing your projects before the interim report is due, you will not need to do an interim report. You will just do your final report. And of course, at any time for awarded grantees, if you're having issues and need any support, you can contact us, particularly Casey, to get any support and help from us. An additional requirement for this year that is different from past years is that when you submit your budget reporting, we also will need all original receipts related to your project. And so please keep that in mind as well. All right, Casey, you want to do the timeline?
Sure. So this is the timeline. The application is already open, so you can find the application on our website. We also have a form that you can download, and if you want to sort of work through the questions without filling out the application at first, you want to think over your project a little bit more, you can do that on our website. And then the application is due on November 15th, 2020. So you have about a month to figure out what you're doing. And if you have any questions for us, please feel free to reach out about your project. We also have, which I think we'll cover later, but we also have a group on Facebook of past grantees that you can reach out to them and also ask about how they've done different things as well. And then we will be going through everyone's applications, and we will be selecting and announcing who will be getting the grant in mid-January. So you'll have some time. And then we'll start funding dispersals in February 2021. At the beginning of February or about mid-January, we will send out contracts with all of sort of the requirements, as Bahia mentioned before, the mid-interim reports and the final reports and things like that. And then we'll actually start dispersing funds to you in the beginning of February. And then your project should take place between February 1st, 2021 and February 28th, 2022. So you have about year to do your projects. That doesn't mean that your project needs to take place the full time of that period, but your project does need to happen within there. So if you have a one event project or a book project or something that is only going to take a month, that's fine, but it just has to take place within that time period, and that's to sort of encompass the JET program year, so which ends in next summer, and then also the Japanese school year. So if you wanted to do like an exchange over like the Japanese school year, you could do that, or if you wanted to do a more short-term project, you could do that as well. And then, as Bahia mentioned, that interim report will be due on June 1st, 2021. That's to us, and we'll send plenty of reminders for that. But if your project finishes before that date, then you won't need to submit an interim report. You'll just submit your final report, as Bahia mentioned. And then your final report will be due 30 days after your project. So if your project finishes in May of the next year, then it'll be due in June, and so forth. And then all final reports and projects should be complete by March 15th, 2022, and that will be due to us. And then, as Bahia mentioned, we'll need please keep any receipts or anything from your projects. We also ask that you, take any like pictures and things of your projects, and we like to share those out on like social media and things like that, and just know how your project went and things like that. So that's the general timeline for the project. This year we've extended the project timeline to sort of address issues with COVID and everything like that, just to give people more flexibility in terms of when they can get their projects done, and give people more time to carry out their projects in case things come up over the next year. So so there is flexibility there.
Okay, so how do you apply? Well, you go to our website and you go to this link, or you select from the programs drop down at the top, programs for current JETs, and then you select microgrants and you get all of the information there. But basically the application is going to include your contact information, your JET information about any collaborators or co-applicants that you have, a description of your project, who the audience is for your project. So for example, if it's community-based or based specifically in your school, is it junior high, is it elementary, is it high school, etc. The potential impact of your project, and I again want to stress that I think this is a really important part of your application. The proposed project dates, and it's fine for some of these proposed things. You maybe don't know exactly when the project's going to be, but you can estimate. So you can say, well, mid-April, for example, or June. So you don't have to have like everything totally finalized for this application, but you need to have thought about it. And we need to be able to tell that you have put some thought into what your project will look like. Your proposed grant amount and the project budget. Now, it is possible that you could have your grant awarded, but not at the amount you request. Based on our experience with past grants, we sometimes have awarded at a lower funding level based on what we know were the actual costs of similar projects in the past. And so just keep that in mind as well. Try to be as realistic as possible about the grant amount you're asking for. The application and all the parts must be received by the deadline, and you can submit that through the form online. Once you're accepted grantees have to sign and agree to the terms and conditions of the grant. And throughout your grant period, you'll have to make sure you're meeting any of the requirements that are laid out in the terms and conditions of the grant, including a branding requirement that when you promote this grant, you mention USJETAA, the US Embassy Tokyo, and include an image of the American flag. If you have any questions, or if there's any changes to your project that occurs after you've applied, that's fine. Just contact us and let us know. And we understand that sometimes things come up, especially in the COVID era. So we will work with you if you need to make any changes to your project after it's been accepted. And then there is an FAQ on the website that you can check out if you have any questions. There's also, if you're trying to get your school on board, there is a Japanese translated description of the program that you can utilize to share with your school. Okay, so lastly, before we get to questions, I want to talk briefly about the type of support and resources that we can provide for you or that you can look to outside of us. For USJETAA, Casey in particular, but myself as well, we are available for advice and questions throughout your project period. We're working on creating a resource guide with some tips. For example, we found in the past that some people have been able to get free books from publishers because they're working out of school. And so we'll try to share tips like that in the research guide. And then we actually also have a Facebook group for micrograntees and interested applicants that you can join. And the easiest way to, the link's on the next slide, but the easiest way to find that is just to go to USJETAA's Facebook page, which on Facebook it's US space JETAA. And then you can click on groups and easily find the group and join the group that way. And then that way you can ask questions of other people who have already received the grants or received the grants in the past. And then I'd like to turn it over to the US Embassy Tokyo to just briefly talk about what kind of resources they might be and support they might be able to provide for you.
So just generally, as Americans in Japan, the embassy is here for you. Our American Citizen Services unit within the consular section is available if you have to renew your passport, if you have a baby in Japan, and then of course, hopefully this is not how we meet you. But if you run into some problems with the law or have any other kinds of destitute issues, of course, the embassy is here to support. But please do keep in mind that while one of the priorities of the embassy is to support Americans overseas, this does not mean that this does not mean we can intervene on your behalf. It does not mean that you don't have to follow local laws, like you still do, but we are here as a resource for you if you need. And as mentioned on this slide, I'd also like to highlight Education USA. So Education USA is the office within the embassy. We also have offices at each of our consulates. And Education USA is the study abroad office within the State Department. And the primary goal of Education USA is to provide accurate and timely information about studying in the United States and about higher education institutions. It is a network of individuals who advise and who also have contacts and reach into the American higher education system. Here in Japan in particular, when it comes to Education USA, the knowledge and expertise of our advisors is beyond higher education institutions in the United States, to include things like high school programs and programs and short-term programs and that sort of thing. Please do let us know if you have any questions about Education USA or even just about study abroad writ large. We're here to help. We're here to give good advice and to advise so that we can all serve as good resources to the students that we meet here in Japan. I'll also, sorry, one other thing. So the embassy does a series of programs and outreach activities. So where you find the Education USA information here on AmericanCenterJapan.com is where you'll see all of the programs that the embassy is involved with. I do highly encourage you to check that out. For example, in the coming weeks, we have some interesting programming on elections that you may find interesting, or that your contacts or your students or parents may find interesting as well. So I encourage you to take a look at that as well.
And also, if you're looking for any materials to support your teaching English in classes or in your possible grant programs, you can visit a website. It's americanenglish.state.gov. It's one of the bureaus in the state within the U.S. Department of State that offers a lot of free materials. And some of the materials are printed and we have them in the embassy. So we could send booklets to you. But because of the COVID situation, it might be quicker and easier if you access to the website. They basically have pretty much exactly the same thing. A lot of them or all of them are in English. So it might be useful if you can work with your JTE. Some of the materials are really fun and exciting, and it's probably very useful for younger students as well.
Thank you. And I believe the embassy also has provided some kinds of training, team teaching trainings and study abroad trainings, which may be moving online this year. So that can be a good resource for you as well. Yeah, just to mention Education USA again, there's always the possibility that they can provide you with materials or information about study abroad. There's the possibility that they could send a speaker to visit your school, although with COVID, maybe that's less likely. And then finally, I want to mention a resource, America in the Schools, that is created by the Japan American Society of Washington State. And this is a series of lessons about a girl's experience in the US educational system, and that's funded by a grant. So I believe it is free to access, and that may be worth checking out, even if you don't use it for this project, to get some inspiration or to use with your regular classes. All right, so now we're at the question part of the webinar. So for those of you who are watching, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A feature to ask those questions, or you can type them into the chat box and we'll answer them. Now, we did get a number of questions submitted in advance, so we'll take those first, and then while you're thinking about any additional questions, we'll answer those. But before we answer the questions, I'm going to remove this slide in a minute for the Q&A. So, but please, this is the best way to reach us. It's all of our contact information. Our general email inbox is contact@usjetaa.org. Casey's email is coordinator@usjetaa.org, and my email is director@usjetaa.org. I recommend if you have any questions before you submit your application, feel free to contact us. And then here's the direct link to our microgrant group as well. I'll try to drop that in the chat. All right, so now let's take questions. We had a few that came in originally. I think that we have addressed kind of some of the changes for the grant program for this year compared, due to COVID, but just to briefly talk a little bit more about that, as you may have noticed, people who are familiar with this this program before, we have extended the timeline for this year. Usually our grant applications would open around September and the program would end in the summer, but this year the program goes from February to February for the grants. So that gives you a longer period of time, and it allows you to time your project with the school year. It should also be enough time, though, for people who are ending their contracts in the summer to have several months where you could do a project So that's the main changes due to COVID. Additionally, we worked with the grantees from this year, many of whom had to revise their projects due to COVID because what they had originally planned was no longer feasible or safe. And so that's something that we can do with this project is if you plan something that seems like it will be feasible and then there's a crazy COVID spike and it is no longer feasible, we'll work with you within that, within your grant idea to make sure that you can do it or you can make modifications to it. All right, so next question. Are projects that only consist of a few students, like 2 to 3, accepted? I'll answer this and then I'll open it up to if anyone else has any comments. But basically, yes, except that we are interested in that impact piece. And so we have had projects in the past that involve preparing an individual student for a program where they were going to go to go to the US for like a month to participate in some project or something. So yes, they will be accepted, but at the same time, impact, we want to see both long-term impact and the number of people who are impacted by it. And so we do, I think, lean towards wanting to support projects that will have impact on the greater number of people or the broader community. But that doesn't mean that you can't apply if you have an idea for a project that only involves a few students. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I can add some projects I can think of that had like maybe fewer students is if you're working with like maybe an English club like at your school. Like the project I mentioned before about like the podcast, like that was a fewer number of students that were creating those podcasts, but then those English language podcasts about, you know, some point of culture, American culture, Japanese culture, and like the differences and stuff were played for the entire school. And then that person was also trying to get them, you know, for the community. So that sort of turned into a larger thing. Or like some of the other projects, maybe, you know, that started as a smaller project, but then after that they were able to, you know, incorporate other students and things like that because they had the equipment and stuff. So, you know, things like that where maybe you're starting a project, but you hope to grow that project even after the end of the grant, something like that. Or we've had this time around, we had some students who visited JICA, which is the Japanese, I can't remember what the Japanese International, I can't remember what the acronym is for, but there was a smaller group of students at a high school that visited and then were able to engage with, you know, people that worked in the international community, and that was a smaller group of students because it was like a field trip that they went there, but that was also a program that they kind of wanted to do and continue after the end of the grant cycle. So so those are some of like the smaller programs that maybe started out small and then they wanted to continue after that. But yeah, we tend to focus more on you know, bigger impact, or you know, how can your project, you know, impact the most amount of people, either like at your school or like within your community.
All right, so let's move on to the next question. What kinds of events and activities at those events have been held related to a physical book related project? I think Casey can talk, you know, maybe more about this since she works more directly with the grantees, but we have had people who have worked with their local library to create an English book section or increase the number of English books at that library. And then in conjunction with the increase of those books, of acquiring those books and putting them in the library, they have held like story times for children in the community and their parents. That's just one example. Casey, do you have any others?
Yeah, so we've had some people holding like surveys to see like what kind of books and materials students would engage with most often, so that they could, you know, buy books that were more geared towards their students and their interests and things like that. And I found that that was, or the grantees let us know that was very effective in sort of, you know, getting books that were more geared towards the students. We've also had grantees that have done raffles. So like they get the books, they introduce their students to the books, and then they have some sort of event where they have students see, you know, how many books they can read. And then, you know, whoever reads the most amount of books or things, or over a course of a period, will get like a prize or something that, so some sort of like incentive to get the students to like engage with the books, or to read the books and things like that. And I believe that particular project had like, the incentive was that they could get an English language book to take home at the end of that We've also had like read along events for like maybe the smaller students, where it's like a community based thing, and maybe, once a month or something, everyone comes together and they'll like read the book to them. And then they'll have like the books, read a couple of books to them and then have the books available, so families can check out and then read at home. There's also been, JETs who have made like guides for the books. So maybe provided a little like summary of what the book was about, in Japanese or English at the beginning of the book. So maybe it wasn't as daunting for students to get into the book, or they've had like activities, like the comic project that we had this year, used the books in their classrooms and then had like sheets where students could make their own comics and things like that. And then they had the comics that the students created in English were also available for students to then, read other students' comics. So I think those are some of the ways that other grantees have sort of engaged with books or materials like that.
And the person who did the comics project, I believe, created a blog post on her website about that project, which we've linked in our latest blog post about the microgrants that have been completed for the last grant year so far. So definitely check that out. All right, so we had a question come in on the Q&A, and for those of you listening and watching, please feel free to ask any more questions that you have. But the question is, if I'm assigned to an elementary school through JET, who in the community is eligible for a possible project? Can this event or project be targeted to the parents of the students? Is the intended audience required to be students? I'll briefly answer that question, as we have had many projects that involved both community members as well as their children who were not necessarily the students of the JET at their individual school. Community projects are definitely encouraged, though I would say that normally we would recommend that they be open, something that would be of interest to children and younger people, maybe as well as adults, because those are the individuals who are most likely to go on study abroad later and be able to hopefully use English more in their future lives for the rest of their lives. But projects that do involve the broader community are certainly okay and acceptable. Casey might have some examples of that.
Yeah, so we've had some projects where maybe there was some sort of like, Japanese festival or something like that. And then the ALTs or CIRs in the area created a section of the festival that was, America themed, where they had maybe, different games or activities and things like that, which was of course open to, the larger community, but also, a lot of people, brought their kids and things to this sort of festival. So we've had that. We've had, I think I mentioned before, like a scholarship sort of like info session where, the ALTs or something in the area would, educate the community about, ways to study abroad, or, ways to engage with English, outside of the classroom and stuff. But it was open to the community and had like, food or, some sort of other cultural events, like, dances or presentations from different members of the community and things like that. So, school is a good way to advertise these sorts of, events and things, because most ALTs, or I guess most JETs are at schools, but, if you are a CIR and you don't necessarily have, assigned schools, you can do a community project. We've also had like pen pal projects with like older people. So maybe, university students, and then, just older people in the community that wanted to engage with English, but weren't necessarily, taking English classes at like a school. And we've had, CIRs do pen pal projects, and just finding a group in the United States to do a pen pal project with that too. So we've had those sorts of things as well. And then just like planning your own festival. So, being part of maybe a larger Japanese festival and, setting up some sort of booth or area for yourself. But also we've had one of our biggest project has been the Black History Month Festival, which was a group of JETs in Kanazawa who created a festival for Black History Month and just had several events and invited members of the community as well as like their students from their schools and things like that, to the events, and had like 3 or 4 events and things like that. So I think there's definitely different ways to do different events, and you probably will have to be very creative this year, especially if you can't have in-person events. But there's definitely ways to create events where, you can invite all of your students and stuff, and then if you don't have students, just work in the larger community as well, and invite those people. And obviously there will be younger people that come as well to these sorts of events.
I don't know if Noyori or Grace, you have any comments about this particular question?
Definitely targeting parents in a community are a great way to reach out to our main target audience. If you can go back and refer back to what Bahia mentioned earlier about the overall project objectives, please keep that in mind always when you think about audience, your project. If you think about who would be the influencers for that particular audience that we are talking about at large, you can narrow down and you can be specific to little different audience, maybe not listed in our program summary.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
Thank you so much. So the next question, are USJETAA staff available to discuss project ideas prior to the application process? Yes, we are. With the time difference and everything, it's a little bit difficult to schedule an actual, like Zoom meeting. But what I would recommend is if you have an idea and you want feedback on whether we think the idea will fit within the requirements of the grant, you are welcome to send us an email with a little bit of information about what you're thinking and ask for feedback, and we're happy to provide that. I think it'd be best to send it to Casey, coordinator at usjetaa.org, and then she will discuss with me as needed about any of those projects. We've also had in the past people submit two different grant proposals because they had 2 different project ideas, and if you want to go that route, that's fine as well. Sorry, my cat. If you want to do that, that's fine as well. But just know that we would only award 1 grant if we selected you. You wouldn't be able to do both projects. Next question, are there limitations to collaborating with other JETs for these projects? Can multiple grants be awarded if JETs from other areas are willing to collaborate? So there aren't any specific limitations that we have. You can involve as many co-applicants or JETs as you want, and as is feasible for your project. Rather than award, multiple grants for JETs across the areas, what we would want you to do is apply for one grant, and list all of the other JETs who will be working with you on that project as collaborators. And maybe that means that 4 different schools will participate in this project, and 4 different JETs will be involved with the planning and execution of those projects. You can submit that as an individual project if you'll be working together, and maybe ask for a higher funding amount to cover whatever the costs are for those schools. We have also in the past, we've had different people in the same region or city apply independently with similar projects, and that is fine as well. But I think it's actually a better idea to just all collaborate together and apply together, because that way we can make sure that we can, if we can see the impact across multiple schools, that is a very good thing for your grant application. And then it allows us to know that, oh yes, there's interest for all these people and they're working together, and then we can make sure you have the resources that you need for that. Yeah.
I'll just add, your collaborators don't necessarily have to be other JETs as well. A lot of people have, collaborations with like their JTEs or someone at their school, or maybe someone at their local library that's really, interested in the project and really wants to, help out and things like that. And so you can list those people as well, as collaborators, or maybe the Board of Education, is on board with the project. Some people have done like English camps or things like that. So you can list those people as well. They don't necessarily have to be JETs. Also, if you have, other teachers in your area that are not on the JET program and you want them as collaborators, you can list those people as well. Or just, other community members or things like that that want to help out with your project. You can do that as well. And that's a good, I think one of the questions got through email was just like, what is a good way to start with, setting up something in your community. And that's a good way to do that is, reaching out to, maybe your local library or your local community center, or, even someone at your school that you find super supportive, and, running your ideas by them, because they can help you to sort of formulate your ideas or give you ideas about like if you need like a venue or a way to advertise and things like that. So definitely reach out to those people as well as other, JETs at other schools and things like that.
I also just generally would recommend that when you're considering your project, before you apply, maybe talk with anybody that would be essential to making the project happen. So for example, if you plan to do a project that involves students at your school, I would recommend talking with your JTE or your supervisor about what you plan, and letting them know about the grant program, because we have we have had in the past where people have had really great ideas and then have had difficulty actually implementing them at their school because things that they didn't think were going to be issues were issues. For example, Japan is very, very privacy conscious, and when there's anything that involves especially students and the internet, that can be a touchy point, and especially with COVID, I can imagine that could be some kind of roadblock. So definitely like talk with whoever you're planning to, whoever is the stakeholder that needs to buy into this project before you apply. It'll make things a lot smoother once your grant is approved. All right, we have another question. What's the difference between a co-applicant and a collaborator? So you as the applicant are responsible for the implementation and the planning of the grant. And if you have a co-applicant, that would be another individual who is also responsible at the high level for basically making your grant happen. But a collaborator would be somebody or an organization that is working with you on the grant, but they're not the organizer, they're not the planner of the grant. So like, for example, let's say you're an American JET and you have a co-applicant that is a British JET, and you plan to put on, to create an English library resource at your community library. Well, your collaborator would be the library or your contact at that library, but they would not be the person who is responsible for this grant and implementing this grant. I hope, don't overthink it, please, but essentially, whoever the main applicant is must be an American citizen. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, and just to add from like a logistics point of view, I guess your co-applicants would be the people that we would be talking to, the applicant and co-applicant in some cases. So people that are organizing it. So, we'd be asking you for your interim reports and things like that. And if you had any like issues, we've had projects where there was, two main co-applicants that were sort of handling it. They were dividing things between them. So maybe I would be in communication with both of those people to figure out what was going on. Whereas like the collaborator would be someone that the applicant would be talking to and working things out, and wouldn't necessarily have a relationship with us. There's also the situation of maybe it's a group of JETs who are doing something, right? And you have one main person that is sort of handling everything, but is, doling out tasks to the co-applicants, the other, JETs or teachers or whatnot, organizers of the event. So it sort of works both ways. But yeah, as Bahia said, it's not really super, I guess, super important about how those are divided up. But yeah, co-applicant usually takes a bigger role in the organizing and planning of things.
All right, so I think we've answered all the questions that have come in. Thank you for your excellent questions. As we mentioned, yes, if you have additional questions that we didn't answer here, feel free to send us an email and ask us those questions, and we'll get back to you. The applications are not due until November 15th, so you do have time to work on them. So I do recommend just taking a look at the questions in advance or downloading the Word document where you can start drafting your application before you submit it, and then letting us know if any questions come up throughout that process, and we'll answer those questions as best we can. I'd like to thank Grace and Noyuri for being here with us today, especially so late in the evening, your time, and we appreciate your continued support and collaboration on this project, and we're looking forward to having a great microgrant program again this year. All right, and thank you so much to the attendees also being here late at night. I've put a few of the links that came up in the chat, and we'll send that out to the registrants after with the link to this recording, and we'll also put in that email links to some of the summaries that we've posted about past grant programs, just so that you can read them and get an idea. But please don't feel that you're limited to doing anything that other grantees have done. If you have a unique, creative idea that has never been done before, we welcome you to apply or run that idea by us. And we've been really impressed with all sorts of creative programs that JETs have come up with over the past few years. All right, well, have a great evening, everybody, and we'll hopefully see your applications come in soon. Good night.